Welcome to One Man's Tracks, the second-hand music channel. It's time to kick off Maynard May-Hem. For the month of May, I'm going to be talking about going through the music, the bands, the creative endeavors of the man, the legend, Maynard James Keenan. An engaged, driven, creative spirit with a lot of good ideas and a ton of amazing songs, and one whose success I feel is quite warranted. I've got a lot to say about the guy. However, to begin this whole MJK bonanza, we've also got to talk about Billy Howardell and the many atmospheric alt-metal masterpieces they've made as a perfect circle. Billy Howardell was a guitar tech and sound engineer for a bunch of great bands throughout the 90s, eventually working with Tool and moving in with Maynard in the late 90s in his house in California. He was playing some of his demos while working on getting a band together of his own when Maynard heard some of his tracks and offered to sing over them because he enjoyed them so much. While he had originally imagined this being a female-fronted band, Maynard James Keenan has quite the range and had already quite the acclaim at the time, and so in 1999, a perfect circle was formed. They'd be joined by Pixies bassist Paz L'Enchantin, Failure's guitarist Troy Van Leeuwen, Primus's drummer Tim Alexander, but he would be replaced by Josh Freese before the release of their #1 best-selling rock debut, Mer de Noms, in May of 2000. They've since released 3 more albums, 3 live albums, a live box set, a remix album, a best of, and an EP sort of thing, with Maynard and Howardell being the mainstays, the producers of A Perfect Circle for 25 years now. They did end up taking about a 5-year break between 2005 and 2010 for Tool, Puscifer, and likely wine-related reasons, and it took about 15 years between their 3rd and 4th albums, so it's been a bit of a slow time for them during this past little while, but they're back, they're touring, they're in it. Get out there. They got James Iha on guitar now, Matt McJunkins on bass. He also plays for Puscifer and Ashes Divide, as well as Josh Freese coming back around. He's in the group again. But that's enough about their history. Let's get into the music. It's time to get into ranking A Perfect Circle studio albums from worst to best based on my enjoyment of them, and that was surprisingly difficult considering there's only 4 of them, but it's really not a terrible problem to have as it forced me to settle in and really digest these fantastic albums. Because there's really not a bad song in the bunch. These are all incredibly rich, engaging, insightful projects whose concepts and emotions remain just as prescient as when they were released. Enduring LPs with each having a unique approach, yet all being enveloped in this dark, heavy, atmospheric blanket that is simultaneously harrowingly heartbreaking and propulsively motivating. There really was only one easy placement on this worst to best list, and that's in large part due to most of the tracks not being originals. Sure, they do their best to reinvent them and give them their own interesting spin, but I find it's quite a tall task trying to reinvent classic anti-war songs, and I think the band falls just a tad short on a few of their attempts on their 3rd album, released just a day before the Bush-Kerry presidential election as an anti-political apathy album on November 2nd, 2004 through Virgin Records, produced by Maynard and Billy. This is Emotive. It may sit at the bottom of this list, and many of the tracks may still sit in the shadows of their forefathers, but I've still got a lot to rave about here. Firstly, while incredibly bold, this tracklist is a top-tier compilation of powerfully poignant political tunes from far and wide. I mean, simply having John Lennon's Imagine, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, down to Led Zeppelin When the Levee Breaks and Joni Mitchell's Fiddle and the Drum, just kind of as sort of quasi-bookends for this compilation, is pretty astounding in itself. On top of that, we get one of only 2 ever recorded Tapeworm tracks, a Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor sort of supergroup thing that Maynard was a part of throughout the late 90s, I think early 2000, and it totally rocks. It's called Passive, and wow, it's worth the price of admission alone. Such amazing progression and lyricism. I love it. This record introduced me to a couple of rad punk albums I hadn't heard through their covers of bands like Crucifix and Fear. Let's Have a War being one of my personal favorites here. It's so anxious and dramatic. And I also dig APC's cover of Black Flag's Gimme Gimme Gimme. It's such a cathartic blast. And while he does do a pretty remarkable Maynard impression, I find the songs where Billy takes on the lead vocals are the ones I tend to connect with the least here. It seems like he's lacking a certain je ne sais quoi, gravitas, or a vivacity that really helps to spur the listener of a protest song into real action. They also include a quasi part 2 to an incredible song from their previous album called The Pet. This version's called Counting Bodies Like Sheep. It's brutal, it's a little more glitchy and manic than The Pet. I think it's great. The Zeppelin cover here is pretty cool too, but it's all about the Joni Mitchell closer. It's this perfectly touching, stripped back, stirring performance that Maynard delivers here that really brings it home, ties it all together, puts that last nail in this, at the very least, educational album. Certainly a predictable pick for worst album, but what am I to do? A clever misdirect and slip in Emotion here instead? That's just a little video remix album thing, and it lacks the cohesion, intimacy, and directness that the studio LPs bring right up to the forefront. If you are interested, maybe check out Paz's version of Hollow, and I guess the Blue remix has its moments, but really, unless you're using it to cool down and just drone off in the background, I rarely put that on, even instead of Emotive here. Now, when it comes to the top 3, it really does get tricky. These are 3 sensational, provocative, moody, I'll say it again, masterpieces. Each at some point or another during this discovery phase held on to that coveted number 1 APC LP slot. They're just such cool, emotional alt-metal blends that touch on social issues and are all so incredibly re-listenable. Not to mention the fact that this is Maynard's most straightforward lyricism and messaging amidst all of his catalog, so I think it's a great place to get introduced to his stuff. And for that reason, I think that my third favorite A Perfect Circle album might be a neat place for a new fan to start. Arguably their most urgent and timely, as well as wide open and poppy release. The latest serving of uncomfortable truths and bitter breakdowns through melodious progressive rock music. Released on 4/20/2018 through BMG Records with a little production help from Dave Sardi. It's A Perfect Circle's Eat the Elephant. Some of their catchiest tracks ever, this long overdue album lashes out at the disconnected state of our society, theatrically hitting listeners with blunt human truths and cautionary tales highlighting our needs for community and activism, seeking out a common understanding in this ever more confusing and convoluted world. With beautifully clever, dark, on-the-nose numbers like Disillusioned, The Contrarian, and The Doomed, and the melodramatic motifs of the title track, along with So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, and Delicious, and Get the Let Out, all serving as these meta-ironic motivators for justice that are worthy of the stage. The record's oldest song, By and Down the River, is a bridge to the band's more dense, ethereal past. With perfectly cryptic imagery, this dreary emo prog cut is an epic journey with a propulsive instrumental. Definitely a highlight alongside the energetic and freeing Hourglass that just bangs every time and leads us into another contender for top track feathers, where I find the message and the medium combine in this harmonic melancholy that this band just does oh so well. They don't quite, however, nail it when it comes to a song like Talk Talk, where the level of disconcernment is just too off kilter and reaches this sort of hypocritical overload. And the results of that are good, sure, but even with the understanding behind the motivation of this track, it just gets too crazy and ominous for me to get behind it. I'm certainly more partial if I'm looking for that similar moral fix in an APC song to put on a track like Judith or The Noose, and I think The Pet has that exact level of disconcernment I'm looking for, and these guys just sort of overdo it when it comes to Talk Talk, and it just doesn't quite vibe with me. On the other end of things, energetically speaking, we have the somber opener Eat the Elephant, as well as the mechanical closer Get the Let Out, just lacking in a bit of that spice there, ending up feeling like strange motivation tactics or unenthused empty threats. Sure, at the end of the day, though, they are pretty great, get their message across, and do introduce the expectations of the record while still having a call to action for their listeners, so I can't complain too much. Whew, I'm happy for that one bite at a time metaphor, because man oh man, this last choice has been flip-flopping from week to week. Both incredibly vulnerable, metaphorical, platinum selling, progressive art rock triumphs that stand the test of time. It's really not fair to put them head to head, but that's kind of the point of this video, and so my current second favorite, A Perfect Circle album, was released in September of 2003 through Virgin Records, with production help from Kleinholder as well as some mixing from Andy Wallace. It's A Perfect Circle's 13th Step. An outstanding and shrewd breakdown of addiction, 13th Step being a reference to the 12-step program that I'd initially thought represented a relapse or restarting of the cycle, or maybe even the final step in someone's journey. But after doing a bit of research, apparently there's something called a 13th stepper, a member of the program who's been in it a long time that takes advantage of and preys on the younger AA members as if battling their own internal demons wasn't enough already. So it might be negatively connotating AA here. It might not be. I personally only went to AA long enough to find out it really wasn't what I needed, but I do know many of its beneficiaries. I'm certainly a big proponent and think that one day at a time is a universal truth that everyone can get something out of. A message that sort of resembles the thing with the elephant from earlier, eh? Another similar thing that happened earlier is these guys introducing me to another cool band by playing one of their songs. This time it's The Nurse Who Loved Me, originally by Failure. It falls under the category of oddly evocative and brings some much needed humor to a very heavy project. But now I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'm the one skipping steps. That's unacceptable when you have an unskippable opener like The Package to kick off this grand and winding insight into an addict's dissonance, gradually growing more desperate, animalistic even, with phenomenal breakdowns and taking you right into another moving piece called Weak and Powerless that wastes no time digging deeper and then finding space to take that first step and admit that you are powerless over your dependencies. There's so much amazing layering across this album, but I really have to point out this particular standout moment on the track list. Rolling right on into The Noose, a rocker that touches on many of the other tenets but hones in on the ninth, making amends, demanding an impossible level of retribution from someone who uses this step to act holier than thou and veil their past mistakes even though they've caused irreparable damages. Essentially saying that the dead can't forgive. A solid song with great storytelling whose avoidant energy slides into this heart-aching next track, with Blue being another desperate last-ditch attempt to twist a horrible circumstance. From there we reach this album's uncertain center and evaporate into the airy, ethereal vanishing. A stranger, maybe a 13th stepper, creeps in next, trying to take advantage of a lost soul, lulling them using their powers of deception to make them feel pity and let their guards down. It's the most stripped back track on the record, and that is especially emphasized by how incredibly radical its follow-up The Outsider is. Quite possibly my favorite APC song, The Outsider takes on the ignorant, short-sighted, and all too common perspective of addiction and charges towards its inevitably extreme outcomes, magnificently spotlighting the foolhardy attempts at understanding that tend to push those affected just further into the fringes. Its infectious grooves and hooky melodies just have me every single time. The paranoid and cryptic whispered crimes might represent someone doing the 8th step, writing a list of everyone they've wronged, but it also might be someone trying to fulfill the horrible wishes of the previous track, but are unable to commit once they hit 10. It's mostly just this creepy transition before we hit that ostentatious failure cover I mentioned earlier. There's a couple more highlights I must mention, one being the hard as fuck A Perfect Circle instant classic The Pet, as well as the serene closer Gravity, where you've been fully broken down and are forced to surrender yourself to sobriety, salvation, a higher power, etc. I Choose to Live is such a strong and incredibly potent final statement after the treacherous pilgrimage this LP takes you on. A tumultuous and striking sophomore serving of self-service. Take it how you like it. I've been gorging myself on its cool tunes and moods, and will likely be returning to it once in a while when I need a good reminder. I've already spoiled it with that last pick, so let's just get right into why Mer de Noms is my favorite A Perfect Circle album yet. This top-selling rock debut is worthy of its accolades. Mer de Noms is a poignant, daring piece in the evolution of hard rock music. An enduring epic that explores many aspects of personal relationships through tremendous, moving, unraveling rock progressions and marvelously hooky melodies. As much as the increased production clarity of 13th Step allows for a better display of the band's musical prowess, I love the extra crunch that comes from a slightly rawer mix here. It's that friction that allows those endless earworms to continue to cling to and ride along these familiar emotional frequencies in my wrinkly, bashed up lobes. The progression and cool moving transitions allow this album to flow seamlessly across the many hazy emotional waves that the tracklist provides. A wonderful variety of sounds coming together and encompassing it in an introspective weight that cuts through the dreamy, atmospheric alt-rock days. Each track an earnest and somber reaction to the many trials and tribulations of love's threats. So heavy yet hopeful, desperate and determined, and so damn groovy throughout, from the dope moving tones and supremely sticky choruses of The Hollow, Magdalena, Judith, Orestes, Thomas, and Thinking of You, to the passionate and exposed Rose, Three Libras, Sleeping Beauty, Reinholder, and the most beautiful Brenya, until we finally reach the dejected and defendant Over, grip tight for over 40 minutes of a battering progressive rock storm. With its thematic through lines of unrequited and unattainable love, Mer de Noms entrancingly compartmentalizes desperate emotions and exercises contentious interpersonal drama through riff-tastic rock and roll theatrics, allowing the listener enough of an understanding to learn some fundamental human truths and even experience some growth of their own, something the band has consistently delivered with each subsequent release. Music that motivates progress by being open and honestly addressing reality as it is. Behind all its fantastic theatrics, it's realistic, introspective rock that just gives and gives. A worthwhile discography to explore. I'll be making a how to approach, where do I start, a perfect circle guide video, a little shorter one for anyone who's looking to get into them and needs another push, as well as lots more MJK content coming soon. You can check those out up here or down in the description. Subscribe to know when the next one drops, and please leave me a like before you go. Let me know your rankings down in the comments, and thanks for stopping by, guys. This has been One Man's Tracks. I'll see you on the next one. Take good care.